Alright, today we're going to be looking at a group of US Special Forces items from Vietnam era. And as is often the case when you get a bunch of items, sometimes there's a good story that goes along with it, and this group of items certainly that way. A couple of years ago there was a storage unit auction in Texas, and I believe the storage unit facility was going to be torn down. And so they had gone through and they tried to contact all of the units that had been unpaid for a few years. They tried to contact anybody that they could find, to telling them that the facility was going to be torn down and they needed to come and pay for the units and remove the items. And there were a few units that unfortunately they just never find anybody to come and claim the items or pay the back due fees. And so they auctioned off all the items, and most of the items in these two storage units went to an auction house in Dallas and another auction house that was maybe about 100 miles away, and they just ended up selling the items, a lot of household items, in their weekly auctions. Well, it ended up that the gentleman who had owned two of the units there had been in the military, and unfortunately what they didn't know was that he had passed away years before, and I believe that's why he had prepaid for a certain number of years, and then when he passed away, obviously there was no one to pay the storage fees any longer. And so it had been years. They said that the storage units had been there for about 20 years, and I know this gentleman had died at least 10 years before they ended up having to sell everything off. And so I was able to get most of the items between the two auctions that happened, and was able to put some of them together. And there are a few other collectors who I've sold a few of the items off to, or they bought some of the items in the auctions. And so we're just going to go over a few of the items, starting with these two plaques here. These were from this gentleman's second tour in Vietnam. This is when he was predominantly an advisor to a few of the South Vietnamese units, and also he was an instructor at the Long Hai training facility. And what they were doing there was training the Khmer forces in what is present-day Cambodia. And so they would train them all in Vietnam because they couldn't be sending these US troops into Cambodia to do this training. They would bring them to Vietnam instead. So this was a plaque of, you had US troops and Australian troops that were there training the Cambodians, and this other plaque was actually a plaque that was given to him when he was an advisor to this Vietnamese unit. And there were a bunch of documents relating to this gentleman's career in some of the boxes. You see there's like and some of these were from his time in Fort Bragg, a couple of units. You see there's graduation program from 75. Here's when he was with like the 82nd Airborne. Lots of different very interesting things to read on some of the things that he was involved in. And you see here's like a 5th Special Forces group from 1974. And here's actually the Customs Declaration Registration of War Trophy firearms when he was bringing back a captured SKS. There's a certificate for Special Warfare School. And here's his certificate from Special Forces Training Group, 1966. And a certificate for light and heavy weapons. And there's another, and he's even got some of the stuff here from, like that's a list at the time of US Special Forces that were being awarded honorary Vietnamese airborne qualification. And some other documents that are in English and in Vietnamese. And then we see this one here is for his certificate of completion of pre-deployment training to go to the Republic of Vietnam at Fort Bragg. And we see that was May of 1966. And we see this commendation here actually kind of goes with one of those plaques, because it details here the different units that he was advising in Vietnam in 1971 and 1972. And we see here's just some more, just detailing his whole career. And you see he retired Sergeant First Class, July 1974. And so that was a lot of the documents. Like I said, a lot of interesting information detailing not just his 2 tours in Vietnam, but also his time leading up to his tours. And you've seen these, if you've watched some of the other videos I've done, you've probably seen these. It turned up in another video. This was one of his sets of leopard or balgam camo. And there's actually a photo online of a US Special Forces officer, or not officer, NCO, who is at the Long High training facility in 1972 wearing that same camo. I don't know if it's this gentleman. Obviously there's probably quite a few US Special Forces advisors and instructors at the school there, but it could be him. And here we see there's two different second pattern jungle jackets, and there's a couple of interesting features about the 2 of them. One, you can see, I'm guessing they're just 2 different manufacturers, but we see the material a little bit different on the 2 of them. And then the stitching, we see it's like a light colored stitching and a darker color on that one. And then another aspect that's interesting about both of them is that you'll sometimes hear about uniforms being reissued in Vietnam. And that's what these ones are, because we see where the previous name tape and Army tape were on there and everything had been removed. And we see the previous one, they were Special Forces also, and they had Special Forces SSI for a combat unit. And then I'm guessing when their tour was done, everything was stripped off and the uniforms were reissued to this gentleman. So that's an interesting thing. Sometimes you might see something and say, well, is this put together? Because you can see where, it had something different. And it's like, no, it's just something that was reissued. And we see this one here is another one of his, this is a ERDL pattern one. Kind of odd stitching on there. And these are the ERDL pants, just your standard pants that would have gone with that jungle jacket. This is his indigenous rucksack. You see that in photos sometimes with Special Forces, Rangers, things like that. This is not military, but it's interesting. It was in with his military stuff. It's a Fort Bragg Fish and Wildlife, 1969 and 1970. So this would have been between his two tours in Vietnam. And we see these insulated pants here. I don't know if these are actually like Chinese or North Vietnamese. And you see this is a Claymore bag. You see a BAR belt that's actually been modified some, so it would be ride a little bit lower. And here we've got some of his different insignia. Now this gentleman's first tour in Vietnam was with Detachment 241 and 244, and it was in 1966 to 1967. Second tour in 1971 and 1972. If you remember earlier, when we were showing those different certificates, they had his pre-deployment to Republic of Vietnam certificate from Fort Bragg, and it said 6th Special Forces Group. And so this was probably his beret when he was doing the pre-deployment training, because I believe the rest of the time he was with 5th Group. And this is another interesting thing. Every once in a while you'll see these Special Forces business cards or calling cards that some of those guys would have made up while they were on like R&R or on leave. And this is the first one I've ever seen that still had the box with it. And I believe this would have been from a printer in Thailand. So probably when he was on leave, he went and got these cards made. So that's interesting. See, here is these would be on your uniform. This would be the Vietnamese qualification airborne badge, and this would be for the Cambodian, the FANK. And we see here, so here's like the matching of what that would be. And here's his dog tags. See a little pin there, I believe that's for Cambodian FANK unit. Here's a tie tack for the working with the Australians. Here's the jump wings. This would have been when he was with 82nd Airborne. And we see some combat infantry badge, Special Forces. There's name tapes would have come off a uniform. This is what he would have worn on like that ERDL uniform. They'd wear that just on their shoulder as a combat unit. This would have been from the school over at Fort Bragg, Special Warfare School. There's a beret flash for 5th Special Forces Group. Got a couple of Vietnam era gloves. See sometimes the guys using those when they're repelling, things like that. And this was one of the more interesting things, I thought. It's a in-country made ERDL boonie hat, and we see it's got this reflective tape that's been put on the top. And we flip it over, it's got the orange material on the inside, and what that's for. They're out on a mission, and either they needed the signal for a helicopter when a helicopter was coming to pick them up, or I guess maybe even if you were calling in air support from a helicopter, they'd flip this inside out as a signal so that they could be spotted by a helicopter to know where the pickup guy is at or where not to shoot. So you'll see that sometimes on things that were, I've seen a lot of it that was used with like the MACV SOG units, Special Forces. So altogether, it's a pretty interesting group of items from a gentleman who, like I said, did 2 tours in Vietnam, was with 5th and 6th Special Forces groups, 82nd Airborne, was an instructor with the Cambodian FANK units. He was also with Detachment A241, A244 on his first tour. And I hope that that's giving you a little bit of information on kind of some of the general items that the US Special Forces would have had in Vietnam, some items they might have used. Whether you're a reseller who just looks for information on what things are selling, or maybe you're a reenactor, or you're somebody who just likes the history of some of these items. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I encourage you to check out, this is the 30th video I've done, detailing different items. All the items in these videos all come directly from auctions and estate sales, so none of these items are put together or faked or reproductions. It's all original. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I encourage you to subscribe. Check out the other 29 videos. A lot of different World War II to Vietnam items have been found at sales. And thanks for watching.